Hello, and welcome to Coach Talk, a show more interested in ideas and philosophy than facts and history. This week we're going cross esport. My guest is Aplox. He's a Valorant coach for risen.gg. He's also a chemist and content creator. Alex is incredibly open about his process, as well as the pros and cons of pursuing a pro esports career. If you enjoy shows like this, you should definitely check out his channel, regardless of whether you're a fan of Valorant or not. We talked about the book he's writing, the biggest problems in coaching Valorant, how to learn and how to practice, and how you can get better at learning and better at practicing. This episode is once again brought to you by Coachify.gg. So for those that don't know, Coachify is a coaching platform that, alongside payments, scheduling and practical things, makes tools for coaches. So you can set up live VOD reviews, anchor your messages to specific timestamps in videos for future use, and even set up the auto tracking of goals with the Riot API that links to solo queue accounts. So while I was working, even in the LEC, I was just using a pen and paper. So I understand that learning a new set of tools can be daunting. But with coaching as competitive as it's becoming, anything we can do to set ourselves apart is a fantastic opportunity. And now is as good a time as any to add something new to what you offer and make it as clear as possible for your players. So if you're interested in checking out Coachify.gg, you can do so with the link below. They have a bunch of free options, which I suggest you check out first, although there are tools more catered to teams behind a paywall. And if you do decide to look into Coachify, please drop me a message on Twitter or on Discord and let me know your feedback, as we're working together to try and create the best possible tools for coaches. Lastly, if you enjoy this episode, please like, share and subscribe. And if you're interested in exploring mentoring or any of the other things I do to support coaches in the scene, follow me on Twitter, where you can find all the other links that you'll need. And now, without further ado, Aplox, what is coaching?
I was thinking about this, right? It's you must get a lot of different answers to this question, because there's no one right answer. And I was trying to think of like a good, succinct way of describing what coaching means to me. And I think, to do it as kind of succinctly as possible, it's about getting the best out of the people in any sense of the word.
Okay. I mean, that's why I love starting with this question, because there's often similarities. There's a lot of people talking about the journey and about collaboration rather than necessarily teaching, which is a bit more kind of vertical, I guess. So how do you go about starting a coaching relationship with someone?
I think again, this is where I guess we kind of see differences across different esports, right? I don't know exactly what the coaching structure always looks like in League of Legends teams, right? Which is predominantly what probably most of you guys watching this is probably people that are more interested in League of Legends. So the coaching structures obviously differ a lot. They probably differ a lot inside one esport or across esports or even across sports more generally, right? So I think that dynamic, depending on your role within the team, I think would depend on how you want to kind of go about forming that relationship in the first place. So for me, I've been a head coach probably on the vast majority of teams that I've worked on. And so the relationship has been, how would I describe it? I guess more like a father. You're there for your players, but you're there to push them, and you're not going to just say what they want to hear, but also what they need to hear. And you're going to say it in the most effective way possible. But I think, having worked with a variety of different coaches, I think that relationship, of course, can be very different depending on your role as a coach, and also kind of what works best for you, right? I've found that I've been most successful when I've been a little harder on people, I would say. But that isn't always in my nature and isn't generally how I behave with people that I hang around with. It really depends on the specific relationship and also what works best for the player. I think there's a little bit about scoping that out too.
Well, there's one thing you said that I really like. I can't remember who actually said it, but said coaching is getting people to do what they need to do, but not what they want to do. I think that's quite an interesting way of thinking about it. So you mentioned there that you get more from people when you're a little bit harder. There's loads of different terminology around this kind of stuff, a little bit more vertical, a little bit more dictatorial or whatever. Firstly, how did you find that out? How did you find out that that was going to be a better way for you to get the most out of the players that you're working with?
That's a good question. Probably the team where I first really felt like I had any success, which was some years ago now, when I was coaching Overwatch. And it was the first team I guess I worked on that like won tournaments, I guess, as it were, right? Really had kind of tournament success. And I was at a time in my life where I guess I was kind of under some stress, and I only had so much. I guess I had a shorter fuse, right? I mean, just to be straight about it, right? It was one of those times where, I could only take so much shit, and I guess at that point I realized, especially in that role, that you shouldn't take any shit from anyone. We could describe exactly what that means, where people are lazy or they talk back to you, or they aren't necessarily, they aren't going along with kind of what you want to achieve for the team, and maybe don't necessarily have strict reasons why, or they don't want to because it's hard. Because don't get me wrong, I think as a coach, it's really important that you listen to your players and you take that feedback on. And actually, one of the hardest things to do is to get players to give you feedback half of the time, right? But you shouldn't take any shit, especially as the head coach. It's really important, I think, no matter what game we're talking about, that you have a very clear vision of what you think is an effective way of playing the game, the systems that you want to have in place, operationally, how is it going to function, right? And you have a vision for that, and that will work. And obviously that's something that you kind of develop over time through experience, through practice, and you kind of build an operational model that works for you, right? And I think I kind of had a clear idea of what I thought worked at that time, and I was then quite clear on my players, like, you're going to do it this way, or you're not. Right, in which case I don't want to work with you. Maybe sounds harsh, but often very effective, I've found.
Yeah, and sport is harsh at the end of the day. Like, we're talking about high performance, we're talking about people who are outliers. If you want to be the best at something, especially if you want to be the very best at something, you are definitionally the ultimate outlier. And I think that differentiation of holding people to a high standard, like you're saying, punctuality, or the way that they're talking to you, or the way that they're talking to each other, like holding that high standard, I think is such an important thing. How do you build that vision? If we take vision as the first step, and then maybe we can talk about like the systems and all that kind of thing. How do you build a vision for an organization or for a team when you first come in?
I think before you even, okay, so this kind of depends, I guess, on the nature of the team, right? I think from my point of view, if you're, okay, so because there's two ways this can happen, right? You join a team and you're building the team yourself. In which case, before you've even joined the team, you should know exactly what you want already. You've not even got a single player, right? Maybe you've no staff, you've just joined and you're building everything from scratch. You're choosing the people that are working with you. At that point, you've got to choose an organization that's kind of aligned with your vision of how you think a team should work. It's a little different, and I think probably a little more challenging to join a team that already has players on it, because then you have to conform to, I guess, their operational model that they've already got. And often changing that can be very hard without changing the players. So you asked, how do you kind of build a vision? Obviously, then this comes even before this, is what do you think works best? What do you think is a team? How should people communicate to each other? What is, for me, I've often focused very much on communication. And, you know, because I'm from an FPS background, I think regardless of the game you're playing, actually communication is essential, right? It's a team game. I think the pacing of the pacing is obviously very different across different games, and I think that's the thing that differentiates them in that sense. But for me, that's kind of the core concept, because the thing that takes 5 exceptional players and makes 1 exceptional team is how they interface with each other, right? The communication. And so for me, that's often where I start is, okay, what's our communication structure look like? And what is everyone's role, right? What do they have to do? And therefore, how does that kind of feed all together? You know, it's how do you go about building that? Well, I think obviously practice, like you try shit, and does it work or not? Do you think that this person should be doing that? Do you think they should be communicating that part of it? Is this really like the part of the strategy that they should be discussing with their teammates, or they should be kind of bringing to the team? And of course, studying gameplay, right? I think that's the other way of doing it. You can see, again, regardless of the game you play, you all find that different teams play different ways. People from different parts of the world have specific styles that fit that region because they all practice against each other, right? And that's the same across basically any title, right? There are nuances to kind of every region that has its own specific style. So also finding a style that works for you, that you think is most effective, and whether you have a team in the first place or not kind of would then maybe change which approach you take. I think once you get better, you can implement different styles of playing depending on the players that you have. And of course, if you're the absolute best, you can say, guys, we're going to play this style today. We're going to play this style tomorrow. Which I think is even harder. I think even at the highest level of play in most games, very few teams can do that, actually. That was a lot, but I think there's a lot to be said for having a vision for the game, and there's a lot that comes to it. I mean, it's also a bit about who you are, right? And how do you think about things? You know, I'm a scientist by training, and I'm very analytical, I guess, in that kind of approach. I like a very structured way of playing, and so I approach games in that way. So there's a lot of things to kind of think about.
I think it's such a crucial step that often we miss in esports and in most sport. There's kind of roles that don't even really exist in esports, and this is the part. Like, this is, I think, the biggest difference now between the top end of sport and the top end of esports is the people with a clear vision and the longer term planning and the thinking more about the future. But it just takes work. It takes work to understand what kind of players am I actually, what do I want? What do I see from a team, like you say, I think is really, really important. And of course, you should be slightly flexible. You know, the idea that your philosophy could, you know, bend but not break. You need to work out what are the points where this is just, you know, a non-negotiable, or however you want to describe it. But even actually having that, taking the time to see, like, okay, what is the best version of this game look like? What does the best version of a team look like for me? I think is so important, because what happens if you don't have that is you kind of just find the best names that you can find. And I use names very specifically because it's not necessarily the best players for you. Because I mean, if we take this idea, I'm also very structured in my approach, and that might mean that maybe some players who are amazing because of their creativity aren't going to thrive under me. And I think we need to get used to or comfortable with, as coaches, having those conversations where it's like, look, and I've had these actually with players where, okay, I think you'd be a great player on another team, and I still think I could be a great coach with another player. So we have to just kind of get become okay with that somehow.
And I mean, this is something that exists in conventional sports. You see it all the time. A player goes to one team and they look like rubbish, right? They play like rubbish. They don't fit in that team, and they go somewhere else, and someone's like, "Oh, the like in football, right, or in soccer if you're American, right? Oh, yeah, he's so bad on that team. Like the manager must be awful." And you're like, "Well, but that isn't really how it works, right? Every team has its own." Again, I mean, I'm using this term operational model. I don't know why that's the term that makes sense, but hopefully that's kind of clear. People understand what their job is, and sometimes people just don't fit the mold, right? You're trying to fit a square into a circle-shaped hole, and that just doesn't work.
Yeah, and like you say, like the first step is to work out what you're actually going for, what you're actually aiming for, and then you can start to build off that. And as you mentioned, there's ways to do it looking at the game, even just thinking about the game, but thinking about the team. From there, we can, of course, draw from teams of any sort. But having an idea of what you're going for in your head gives you a direction. Otherwise, you're just kind of stumbling around hoping for the best.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point here, John, as well. Like, this is part of the reason why I have started to really formalize what I think. Most people, most coaches, even probably the highest tier of coaches across most games, have never written down what they think. They've just thought about it, right? It's just an idea in their mind. And what I've found as I've tried to formalize what I've done, so I wrote a course for Valorant coaches, and I'm now trying to write a book that I guess it's predominantly supposed to be aimed at players, but I think it has much broader implications than that. When you come down to try and write down everything you think and how it all links together and what it all really means, and then you start doing the deeper research on well, what does the science say on this particular topic? I think this, but is that actually, has someone proved it or proved it beyond reasonable doubt, I guess? Often we don't do our due diligence in doing that as coaches, partly probably because we don't have the time. But I would say it's a worthwhile exercise, particularly when you're early in your career, because you can start building towards something. And then again, coaches often don't do this thing to kind of sell themselves. Like an organization comes to you and is like, "What's your vision?" And you're like, "It's a really abstract thing. It's hard to put into words again without formalizing it, right?" So you can be like, "Here, I've got this is my book. This is the TLDR. It's like 3 pages long. It tells you kind of my general thought process, how I think things work. And, if you think that this is the kind of thing you agree with, then take a look. I think we could maybe work together or not." It's something that would definitely set you apart as a coach, especially early in your career as well. And I think help you develop what your vision is more comprehensively.
I think it can be a really painful process, though, right? I mean, I'd love to actually to speak about this book in particular, but we'll start with just the idea of doing that, because I think one of the things that I've noticed a lot, and I've worked in esports for a decade as a coach before I started doing this, but this idea of when you start to put things on paper and you start to actually think back through everything, the problem is that if it's like, it has this slight vagueness to it while it's still in your head, and you think you know what you mean by this term or how you would approach this certain situation, but because it's got that vagueness, it's almost you've got that out. As soon as you decide this is the thing, I'm putting it on paper, and yes, I might disagree with it in a few years' time, and obviously this version will still exist in the world, but at least at this moment, this is exactly what I think. And as soon as you filter that down into one specific spot, now it can be wrong a lot easier than when it was a kind of vague idea. So how was the process for you when you first started writing anything down? And then we'll get onto the book specifically in a bit.
Like you say, I think it's maybe hard to completely distill ideas when they're just ideas. And then in my mind, they should be written in such a way that someone that has, like, this is their first game can go in and understand. Which is really, really hard, right? Especially any game, especially MOBAs, right? I think this goes especially for MOBAs, but they are really complicated. I mean, and again, this is why you have to start at the simplest step, right? The idea is to kill the enemy's base, right? Okay, that's like, okay, well, I can understand that. That's a simple enough principle. And then, okay, there's 5 players on each team. Oh, okay. Oh, there's 3 lanes, like, and there's towers in those lanes, and you kind of go up and like, you have to explain it all from the ground up, and I guess so they can understand your language as well, right? Because there's more than one way of describing that and how you would break that down, right? How you would again, I'm kind of using the MOBA example because people will be familiar with it, right? But how you would break down different parts of the map and how you would break down, specific approaches to doing this, right? Different phases of the game, for example, and all of those things, and then breaking it down in a way so that, again, you're starting from a level where everyone understands what the game is, even in the first place, which, to be fair, is also really, really hard, right? If you just want to explain what the game is, which is, of course, a prerequisite to describing any strategy, that's really hard too. That's hard in itself. But once you've done that, once you believe that everyone that has read it should have understood what you mean by the game and what it means, and generally what the kind of correct plays are. Like, for example, I'll just use a stupid example again. I only know so much about League. I was a Dota player, so I apologize for that. But similar enough, you wouldn't play a game where probably, maybe there's some people that have done crazy shit like this, right? But just like 5 people just go jungle for the whole game, right? Like you could feasibly do that. That's a feasible strategy, but it would be probably nonsense, right? But someone looks at the game, there's no reason why they wouldn't think that was a reasonable approach, right? There isn't, right? And maybe they think it's a more effective way to play the game, right? So in some ways, actually, the really important thing about sitting down and formalizing it is you challenge your underlying assumptions. What have you already said? Like, this is how it works. Because often those are that's the bit exactly what you described, where you're like, am I actually wrong? Because again, as a scientist, that is often the most important thing when it comes to science, is to challenge your belief in the first place. What is it that you're assuming is true?
I think that's so crucial, and a mistake that we make over and over again. Where, I mean, we have this problem currently in League of Legends. I don't want to make it specifically League of Legends, like coaching focus is fine. Stick to Valorant is good. But we have this problem at the moment where something changes with the way that Riot is running the tournament, or with the way that they're just doing things. And I see over and over, everyone just keeps doing the same approach because it's just the inherited wisdom. And, one of my kind of sporting idols is probably too strong a word, but a coach that I look to a lot is Dave Brailsford. And one of the things that he talks about is when he first came into cycling, that was the whole point. They wanted to hire sports scientists who are not involved in cycling. Because we wanted to very specifically be not held back by any of the inherited wisdom. We just say, right, we need to destroy the enemy's base, or we need to win X number of rounds. Like, how do we go about it? Let's not just do it because this is the best team, because it's suboptimal when people do that in sport. But in sport, people have had 100 years to refine that inherited wisdom, and it's still suboptimal. Whereas we've been doing it for like 5 years, and somehow think that like in those 5 years, we found the best way of doing things. And my kind of approach always is, whenever I see a performance pattern or an approach that, like, I was there when it first started, I'm always so quick to throw that out, because it's like, I know how much I knew back then, and I wouldn't trust me to coach. So why are we all doing that? And it's something that I think is, I think it's just such a good point, no matter where we are.
Yeah, I think again, often we aren't really. I mean, I think we are, but I think maybe, again, I don't know how broadly this goes, but I think that we often. I'm not going to throw specific names under the bus here, but I think that we have maybe some people in leadership that are not innovating. They are doing what we've all done because we don't have the formal training, right? We've looked at what other teams are doing because that's the only learning resource most of us have, right, to start off. got no fucking idea what's going on. Well, what does Fnatic do, right? They're a good team. I know who they are as an organization. I can look at what they do, right? Copy what they do, or take any other big organization, Team Liquid, Loud, like you think of any top organization across the world, you can look at what they do and you can say, okay, can we replicate what they're doing? Can I first of all understand it, and then can I try and replicate it? And a lot of the people that have become very successful have got very good at doing that. But I think we aren't maybe mature enough in the scene where we have people or we are really forced to innovate. Because I certainly think it's true, and this is probably true in most esports because they're so young, is the skill difference in individuals is still much larger than the strategy matters, right? So the best player in the world, like someone like Faker, right, who everyone knows, he's a household name in esports across the board. If you know nothing about League of Legends, you've heard of Faker, right? Someone like that is, I mean, I don't know where he is right now, because again, I don't follow League very, very closely, but there are people like that in every esports title that have just been so good for so long and so much better than everyone else that the strategy mattered somewhat, right? The teammates mattered, of course. Of course, all of those things mattered. Things still did matter, but the skill difference on an individual level is very, very large. And this is definitely true in Valorant today. There are players that they just shoot better. It's a shooting game. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if a guy, he avoids all of the utility and he's just positioned and 5 guys walk out in front of him and he just shoots all of them in the head faster than the other guys do, doesn't matter, right? Like fundamentally, he's just better, right? And there's only so much, you could do to beat that if your players just aren't as good, right? It's as simple as that. And I guess we aren't often pushed to innovate because also, again, the sample sizes are still so small, right? So the individual variance is much larger. Maybe again, some people might not understand what I mean by that, but I guess any human population has a distribution of skill, and if you're the larger your sample size, right, you kind of imagine this distribution of people. If you've got lots and lots of people, some from, you're going to be able to then get a lot of people at the top. If your sample size is very small, only some of the people come from the top 0.0001%. Many of those people are probably not doing esports because there's better ways to make money. There's other things that you can do that that you may have thought of doing in the first place. You just chose to be excellent at something else, right? And so we still have that very, very large variance in esports because it's not that popular yet, right? However much we're seeing it's growing and it's becoming a kind of, I guess, a mainstream thing to do. We're not at the point where I think the individual skill has equalized even at the highest level of play.
And I think as well as the sample size, it's the short timelines. As well.
Yeah.
If you're going to do the right thing and you're going to do all the right things as an organization, not just as a team. I mean, you're talking about looking at who's at the top. I don't know if anyone would be able to make a good argument as to why the whole EG organization, like the things that they did, ended up in the victory. It's like that's quite a difficult thing, I think.
Yeah.
But you get this idea. I can't remember what the book is actually called, but someone made a point where in modern workplace, no one ever gets fired by following the data. And I really, really love that, taking that into esports, where we're not actually talking about data in this case, but following the good teams. So in League of Legends, it's like, okay, all the Korean teams are doing this. If you're in charge and you copy what the Korean teams are doing and you lose, it's like, well, at least we copied the Korean teams. Whereas if you try something new and you lose, suddenly it's like it's your fault. And I think that happens kind of all the way down, but especially at the level that kind of should be looking to innovate and should be looking to try something new. So if we just follow the inherited wisdom and it goes wrong, then you can say, well, everyone else is doing this, so it wasn't my fault because like we're all doing the same thing. Whereas if you actually took a stand and say, okay, we're going to approach this in a different way because I've just thought, okay, if the only thing was to win rounds, how would I do it? And I've come up with something different. If it doesn't work, it's on you, I think.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really, really great way of putting it, John. It's just, if everyone else is doing it, so I'll do that, right? Right? Like there's no argument you can really make against that. I think another part of it as well, like we say about the kind of sample size, excuse me, It's just kind of it's no surprise, right? But just the instability in your career, right? Like one day you're in, one day you're out. Oh shit! Well, I got to do something else then, right? Because there's no money in tier 2. I mean, it depends obviously where you are, right? I think there's a big variety of things, right? But you can very quickly get to the point where you're making no money and you're basically having to play full time. It's just not feasible, right? So how do you expect any talent to ever develop? People that kind of need time, which is definitely true, right? There are definitely people that have incredibly high skill ceilings, but their skill floor is very low and they just needed time. Maybe they just won't get it, right? It's just, sorry, finished university. I've either got to start doing a full-time job or I need to be paid. And maybe you're not at the skill level yet where you can really persuade someone to give you money to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think all of these things just all combine to push us to take less and less risks, and that's how we end up in the same situation. One of the things that I'd like to ask, because you've got experience of different, like multiple different esports, but also very different from my background. I think one of the things that I talked to a guy called Simon Cox on the podcast, who is a sports director. So that is his role. So he goes he does Olympic programs, he does rowing primarily, but he goes to places, either ones that he's been to some that have, very successful, massive Olympic programs, and some where he's got to start it from scratch. But what they can do in sport is they can say, okay, look, this is where we're currently at. This is the length of the race that we're trying to compete in. This is the Olympic winning time, and this is the time that we've got. So we're currently 90% of the way there. We're going to do these things, and then we'll get to 91% of the way there, and then we do these things. You can see the steps. Whereas in esports, in League of Legends, at least, I don't know any way of like measuring the percentages. I don't, because it's a snowball based game as well, where you can make one small mistake early on and then actually,
oh fuck,
there's no hope. Yeah, like if both teams play perfectly, now we're just hoping they make a mistake. So I mean, obviously you've got eco and stuff in something like Valorant, but I think you're right in saying it has maybe less of an impact. It's not quite so snowbally. If you mess up the knife round, you've still got a chance. It's not just doomed.
Definitely.
Is there any kind of percentage to say how close is your team to whoever's currently at the top?
There are definitely metrics that you can use to measure how good you are, right? I think there are obvious statistics that you would like to track. I mean, your win rate in attack rounds, your win rate in defense rounds, right? I mean, this is probably the same thing as like, so in Dota, and I think it's the same in League, right? Like your creep score during the laning phase, for example, right? Like, how does that compare to people doing the same role as you? How does my win rate in defensive rounds or attacking rounds or specific situations, what does that win rate look like? I would say those are the closest metrics you can get to kind of measuring how do you measure up to the kind of opposition. But at the same time, then how good is, you only played so many tournament games. How good, again, is this again comes to a little bit to assumptions. How good of a model is a scrim? Which is often a pretty shit model, I would say. But anyway, I would say that's probably the kind of metrics that I would looking at. Pistol win rate, eco win rates, anti-eco win rates. What's your win rate when you're both on full buys? And breaking down those numbers and then comparing them to a kind of known standard. What's the best team in the world? What's the average team in tier 1 and worst team in tier 1? And where do I kind of fall on that line? And of course, if you're tracking many of these metrics, you then get some idea of, well, where do I need to improve? Maybe my post plants aren't very good. Maybe we're losing someone very frequently early in the round. I mean, like you say, you follow the data in that sense.
So you think if we come back to this idea of having a vision, if I come into an organization and I say, okay, look, here's my vision in 3 years, 4 years, we're going to be at this level. You think there is actually a way to kind of see those steps happening so that we could hopefully, convince the people with the money to keep believing that we're on the right track?
I definitely think so. Yeah, I definitely think that like with anything, there's always things that you can measure. It's then not so much about whether you're actually making progress, but can you make a persuasive argument that you are? That's the same in business, right? If I want to persuade the company that I work for to do a specific thing, I just need to say, I reckon it's going to make us this much more productive. Can I, it's going to save us this much money. Can I try it? Again, it's just about, can I sell them on that? The same with the team. Can I sell them on the progress that I've made? I've done these metrics. I believe that we've improved this much since we started, and blah 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 blah. It's just a persuasive argument, right? That's any business case. I mean, this is. Sorry, we got a slight tangent, but I think really interesting this is why I think esports will only become bigger, because there are so many skills in esports that transfer far beyond simply esports, right? A high performance team is something that everyone wants in every organization around the world, right? That's what every company would like to say that the people that work there are. So just to sell esports a little bit, right? Is this my true belief is that this is where people can learn from esports, is those kind of transferable skills, like exactly what we're describing. Can I sell something to someone? Can I persuade them to give me money to do something?
Yeah, and I think, like you say, you're also persuading your players. That's a big part of the role as a coach, where we talk about. We talk about buy-in normally referring to the beginning of a relationship, but it's still that constant buy-in. And again, even the example we had before, can I convince this person to do something that I believe they need to do to improve, that they don't want to do to improve? And that's kind of such a crucial part of everything. One of the things you mentioned earlier, you were talking about being a little bit more vertical, being a little bit more strict. And you said it goes a little bit against your nature. And maybe when you're not in a coaching relationship or just, with friends, you're not necessarily that kind of person. How have you started to tackle that? Or have you found some things that are really useful? Because that's quite often something that I get asked. I work with coaches nowadays. I work with coaches mostly who are less experienced, but, across all levels. And a big thing about people who are new to esports is they quite often come in, and at the beginning, as I think they should, they're a little bit less, I'm trying to think of a PC analogy, throwing their weight around a little bit less than maybe they would like to be. And sometimes they're just naturally quite soft-spoken. That doesn't mean you're not going to be a good coach, but if they want to build up some of those tools so they can actually feel a bit more confident of saying, okay, look, this is, I've done the work, I've got my ideas down on paper, this really is what I believe. How have you kind of aligned those where you feel one way is a bit more useful, but maybe not quite as how you would be naturally, if that makes sense?
This is a real cop-out answer, but I think it's probably the answer for many of these things is you just do it. You practice, right? The same with so my role now is as a performance coach, right? And of course, this very much what we're describing comes down to performance. Is, well, can you go against your nature? For example, you've got to play a tournament day, you're literally shitting yourself, right? You're absolutely terrified, and you just got to go up there and perform, right? Practice and attention, right? If I want to get better at being confident, what does confident look like for me? If I'm wanting to throw my weight around, as it were, right? Or, kind of show that confidence, then where is my attention at? If my attention is at, I'm not very good. I'm not so confident about this. I'm not so sure about that. Well, firstly, prepare better, be confident in your ideas. And if you are then confident in your ideas, then, well, what behaviors do I need to show to be confident, right? And then again, focus your attention on them. If you do this enough times, you will just become more confident. I mean, it's just practice. It's any learned skill, right? And for me, again, I think another reason why I advocate so much for what we do, again, it could be applied much more broadly. I think high performance sports generally, I think, help you learn these skills because you're always pushing the limit, right? You're always trying to do more. You're always trying to acquire a new skill in some way, whether it's physically or mentally. And confidence is one of those things. And this is something that I've personally seen in my own personal development, right? Over years is I've become more confident. I've become happy to sit in front of people and talk to them and explain my point of view and say it with confidence and actually believe it. or say it like I believe it, which is maybe part of the problem before. So there's kind of two problems there, I guess, in what you say. One is, well, you need to have a clear idea. You need to actually believe what you're saying, first of all. If not, you need to go back and really think about it. And then two, even if you then still feel like you're, I guess you kind of got that kind of performance anxiety, as it were, right? Standing in front of people and having to tell them what to do. Then again, it's about where is your attention focused? If your attention is focused on, I'm a coach, right? But I'm still learning. I'm still developing, just like my players are. I'm now in this session, I am practicing my confidence, right? And going in with that in your mind, just the same as you tell your players, right? And practice what you preach. It's just the same.
I think so often we could all help ourselves as coaches, if you just took the time to like, how would I coach this person? And if I didn't know anything about them and they did all the things that I did, and I think you would come up with some things. And I love that idea. It's like, the same way we tell players, you can be confident in the work, rather than necessarily like, oh, I'm just a better player or anything. It's like, no, you're confident in the amount of effort you've put in and the prep you've got. And the way we behave is just loads of learned habits. And maybe you've spent a long time learning habits about not speaking too loudly and being small and all that kind of thing. It's going to take you a while to try something new, but just again having a specific direction you're facing and just do it, I think is actually just fantastic advice. So I would like to get onto the book that you're writing. We talked already a bit about why a book format, and we talked about how you're starting. I'd like to maybe come into some of the sections that you're writing, because you released the contents already.
Yeah.
So what kind of things are you putting in the like high performance section? Let's start there. What is high performance?
A lot of stuff. It's a section that repeatedly keeps on getting added to, concerningly, because I've spent a lot of time. Performance coaching for me has kind of become a role that I've grown into, not really the other way around, something that I intended to do. It's a lot of different things, right? But I think it's about how we do a lot to practice how we play the game and do the kind of technical things in the game, right? But are we doing the best for ourselves as a person, right? What many kind of coaches do, particularly strategic coaches, where they focus on minimizing the risk in how we play. What high performance is minimizing the risk in what we do as a person, right? In and out of the game, right? Whether it comes to the mental side of the game or how you live your life, right? It has much broader implications, I guess, in that sense. And it's about eking out. Well, I think in many instances, eking out the kind of final few percentages, but in a lot of cases, it can be much bigger percentages than that. It can be 20% or 30%, particularly when it comes to things like performing in officials. So those are the kind of things.
Yeah, one of the podcasts that's heavily inspired is the nice way to put it. What I'm doing at the moment is a podcast called the High Performance Podcast, and they open with the question of what is high performance. And just like we were talking about with the what is coaching one, is just so broad, and there's so many ways to go about it and so many things that are in it. I think it was maybe Phil Neville who said high performance is doing the best we can with what we have where we are. And I like that as a start, but the problem is that means so much more that you could just endlessly be writing about and endlessly be talking about. So you touched on comms, but what is your role as a performance coach currently, just with the team that you're with right now?
I'll be to be honest with you, I haven't done as much performance coaching as I'd like, simply because we only have so much time. And being in a tier 2 team, I've not had as many opportunities as I'd like to do the things that I think I should be doing in this role, because I have to do a lot of strategic things too. I'm probably more of an assistant coach, I guess, or I guess me and the other coach actually work pretty much in tandem with each other. We probably have similar power, I guess, as it were. But if I were to restructure this and kind of do just kind of performance coaching, I think there are kind of multiple things, I guess, that I see kind of under this umbrella. I think the first one is, of course, kind of individual performance. What are players dealing with, and how can we help them deal with those things or be better in specific scenarios? You know, for example, I think again, common ones. Everyone struggles with performance anxiety, right? To some degree, varying levels. You know, if I said to anyone watching this, can you go and sit down in front of 100,000 people and play the best League of Legends games of your life, like to now in an hour, you feel a pang of anxiety just thinking about the kind of idea of it, right? So for most people, that's a very common thing to try to want to optimize. Again, it goes far beyond this. Individual performance, again, it's about mindset. You know, how are they thinking about what they should do? What are their kind of processes? How are they living their life? I mean, performance again comes to a lot of things. What's your diet like? What's your sleep like? Are you doing the right things to optimize those and get all of the percentages out you can? Team culture is one that gets talked about a lot. I think very frequently it's like a real buzzword now. And I think, again, that's something that is really key. If you get this wrong, then you are probably doomed to fail. And most people don't make it a kind of focal point from day one. So again, I would say that's kind of a key part of it. Yeah, I mean, the list goes on, right? There are many things, but again, it's all about the people part of the game, and how can we make that work the best it can.
How do you approach building a high performance culture?
Very clear. What's the word? It has to be very clear to everyone what they need to do, right? I'm kind of losing the exact word that I wanted to use for this, right? But we all have to be on the same page about what that means. What have we agreed upon? What's the kind of contract in the team that we're going to do, right? If we say we're going to do this many scrims, you're going to do this much individual practice, right? We all know exactly what's required of us, right? And I think that for me, that's kind of the first step, is to all be on the same page about expectations. That's the word I'm looking for. We all have the same expectations of what we're going to do, right? Because my expectations might be very different to yours, might be very different to the next players and the other coaches, and so on and so forth, right? I think that is the first step, is clear expectations, right? You all have to be on the same page.
I think that's really good. There's I spoke recently to the general manager of G2 League of Legends, which is the most successful Western League of Legends team by quite a long way. And he just constantly, everything we did ended up coming back to this idea of just make it conscious. Like, let's actually be talking about it. Let's not assume that, well, you want to win, I want to win, so it'll work, right? Because we want to win. So therefore it will all be happy. Yeah, I think that's really good. And whatever ways people go about getting to that point is almost secondary for me. I think the big takeaway is talk about it, decide on things, write it down. You know, get that contract however you want to do it, and then it just becomes the grind as a coach of holding people to that standard. Again, like we talked about right at the beginning, it's all coming together.
Yeah, I mean, because we've all agreed on it, right? Everyone agrees on it at day one. I mean, I recently did this with a team. We went beyond maybe very strict expectations, you know, to things like, what do we expect from each other in terms of behaviors, right? I think this is, again, a key part of culture generally, whether high performance or not, is what do we expect from each other? How do we expect people to behave? You know, do we expect people to be grinding super hard, like until they can't sleep properly? Or, you know, where's the balance going to lie for us, and make sure we have a clear idea of that? Because like you say, it's all of the assumptions where it goes wrong, right? I assume you want to win. I want to win. And so, oh, well, you must want to play 25 ranked games every day after scrims, right?
So do you have a specific structure or process that you go through to get people to that contract? Like if it's going to end as a contract, is there a specific way you go about it, having done it a few times?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I guess for me, the first thing is, well, so we all agree we want to win, right? So the first question to ask yourself is, well, what does a winning team do, right? What is a winning team? What do they do? And it's easy to go out and create a kind of mind map, I guess, as a team and sit down and kind of do this exercise together. What does a winning team do? And then what are the things that we want to do, right? Presumably, just by doing the first exercise, it probably, you hope, answers the second question already. But it's easy to frame it in that way, right? What does a winning team do? What does the best team in the world do? How do they behave? And all agreeing upon those behaviors, right? And then, like you say, it's about holding each other accountable to those things.
Okay, one of the other sections in the book is how to learn, which would be, I think, a great one to explore. So even I'll keep it as broad as possible for the beginning. How do you learn?
There's lots of different approaches to this, right? And I think, again, it depends a little on what works for you. I think I'd have to look exactly at what I've written, but I think I've described a few different kind of approaches to this. I guess to break down the kind of just the simplest parts of it, I guess there are kind of three ways I guess I can think of on the top of my head right now. I may have written more. The first one is just to watch the game, right? Study the game, go out and watch the game, have some idea of what the game looks like, right? What characters do people pick? Are they always kind of the same? Is there some kind of structure? Can you spot the pattern in that? Watch the game is maybe an oversimplistic way of describing this, right? Go and study the game. Really pay attention when you're watching the game. Understand why they're making particular decisions. But that's, I guess, the kind of the first way. The second way is go out and learn from people, right? Whether that's YouTube videos, whether that's dropping you a message, dropping me a message, ask people the question, what do you think of this particular thing? There are resources out there. Often they're more challenging to find, particularly on certain topics, right? You just have to be able to ask the right question, I think. Okay, now I thought of four methods. I guess alongside that is kind of getting coaching from someone or mentorship from someone. But in principle, it's the same idea. Go and get the information from someone else. And the final one is just try it. I was a player before I was a coach. And again, I was kind of a scientist always. It's just kind of always been who I am and has become my job. The scientific method, you try stuff. Did it work? Did it not? What should I do different next time? And I think ultimately probably some combination of the three of those things. I definitely think a mistake that I've made as a coach is I never asked enough for help from people. I think many coaches do that. Maybe I got too much confidence too early. I don't know. But those, I guess, are kind of the four main ways that I think you should go about learning. So, yeah.
I think even just not just coaches, but people need to just ask more. There's a great, really short clip of Steve Jobs that I saw recently. I was talking about with the coach that I'm working with, where he's saying the thing that made people succeed, or the thing that kind of set them apart, wasn't that they were particularly intelligent or particularly hardworking, is that they asked. They had the confidence or the audacity or however they got to that moment, but they actually asked. And he even said that about himself. I can't remember the exact details, but he basically asked if he could use this computer system somewhere, and there was no reason to. You could quite easily talk yourself out of asking, but he asked anyway, and the person said yes, and that changed his life completely, and of course, subsequently changed all of our lives quite a lot as well. So I think that's just really, really good advice to ask people, study, reflect, practice, and then reflect as well on what worked, what didn't work. That leads us on to the next section: how to practice.
So in my teams today, I guess, like I say, I'm a scientist, so I guess I have a clear approach to how I want to do it. So typically, every session, we'll go in with an idea of the things that we want to practice. Like, what are the goals for this session? Whether it's we want to improve at this particular strategy that we're practicing, we want to practice our communication, we want to practice our utility usage. There are an infinite number of things that you could be practicing, but I think this is probably the most important point, probably the most important thing we're going to say in this podcast that everyone could go away and do is have a fucking idea what you're going to do in your practice. If you are just scrimming, that's shit. It's nonsense, actually, right? It makes no sense to practice like that. Practice with intention, right? Have a clear idea of what you want to achieve and go and do that. Because your progress will be severely, severely limited if you aren't doing things like that. So that's the first step, is have goals, right? They could be for that scrim, they could be for that week, they could be for that month, they could be for that year, right? And you can often start with the long ones and kind of work those back into achievable steps to what you're going to do each scrim. Or I guess, or kind of in combination with that, they also come with some reflection, as you've said, right? So where do those goals come from? Well, they can come from your vision of the game. I have a way that I want to play, and so I want to have us play this way, so I will get us to practice that thing. Or, okay, this thing is consistently going wrong for us. Our percentages, again, we talked about those percentages that we're saying this is our benchmark to get to. This particular one's very low. We need to improve in this area. This is the thing we're going to try to fix that. We get better at that thing. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, right? But it will hopefully be moving us towards fixing that issue. And it can come from the statistics. It can simply come from us watching our games back, right? We're not communicating in this scenario. You're not planning in this particular scenario well enough. Again, we can use the MOBA example. You're about to go into a fight. Have you talked about how you're going to approach that fight? Maybe you're just going and you're just taking the fight, and it's like, oh well, let's just hope it works out, right? That's not a good approach, right? So any of those things, right, where you go back and you watch your game and you say, well, we're not doing that well enough, and that could be a goal too. And it's this iterative process, right, where we have goals, we practice, we focus on those goals, we get better at them, and then we go back and we review and say, okay, well, did we do those things well enough? Can we do them better, or can we then move on to something else?
Yeah, I really like that. And if you were to Google what is coaching, stuff like the practice model will come back, which is just that. You find a goal, develop a plan of how you're going to improve at that goal, implement it, reflect, and you just kind of keep that going round. And one of the things that, and I say this because I did this myself, but one of the things that I think we really struggle with in esports is often that second step. So we have a goal, and then we practice as if like, well, I'm just doing a normal practice, but I've got the goal, so therefore I'm going to be learning. And it's like that is, like you said, so much better than practicing without a goal. That is the most crucial point. But one thing that I think we use, especially in League of Legends, and that kind of leads me on to my next question in a minute, is that we use the fact that you can't break down the game almost as an excuse. It's like, well, okay, we need to practice this certain area. If I was in sport, we'd be able to just create a drill to just practice that certain area. But because we can't break down the game, I'm just going to say that and then like move on. And now we'll just play the game in full. And I think something that I needed to do much more, and I constantly am encouraging people to do, is get creative with how you're going to create the practice. The idea is we have the goal. The next step is, how do I make the practice so that we can learn as much about that goal? And maybe the absolute best that you've got is just a normal scrim. But maybe there's something else that you could do where, I don't know, you agree with someone that you're going to do only attacking rounds, even just that as a different, suddenly you double the time that you're learning about your goal because your goal is only in attack, or vice versa, or with certain maps or with certain agents, or is there anything even just completely random that you can suddenly, actually, this will work because it's a certain area. One of the things that I really like chess, and using that as an analogy, if you want to practice your tactical awareness, we can do puzzles or something like that. But you can also do like other things in terms of, or if you want to practice your strategy, you might want to watch the game more. So my practice is actually better to do more of the studying, like we talked about before. So that leads me on to the question. In your opinion, what are the biggest problems that you face in Valorant as a coach? What are the biggest things that hold us back, that if you could change this, we would get so much better?
Yeah, this is this is sorry. This makes me laugh. This is just instantly what my brain went to, is just have better people. Because having been in high performance environments in conventional sports, you realize, of course, we talk about the kind of sample size, but when you're at the top 0.1% of conventional sports, you're with a different kind of people. People that are much more, they give a shit much more. And I don't think people realize how much you need to give a shit. I mean, yeah, I realize that's a bit of a slight tangent to exactly what you're asking, but this is why, I guess, in some ways I've kind of moved to performance, because I think that's where we lack the most, is just that kind of approach. And what people, how much people are willing to sacrifice. Yeah, I realize it's a slight tangent to exactly what you're asking.
No, but I mean, it's really true. And it's, again, probably something that we don't necessarily want to admit. I mean, I was working at Excel when Boaster was there as well. And he originally, he'd been CS before, but had this great approach to League of Legends because he had to get to a certain level to be able to be eligible as a sub. And he just had this really broke down approach. And then when Valorant was going to come out, he did the same thing. And I mean, people have talked about it already a lot, and you can find, obviously, I'm sure he's talked about it as well, but he had a very specific approach with like how he's going to do it. And even seeing that, like when we first got beta keys for this game that was going to come out in a year or whatever, he was just instantly like, okay, these are the things that I'm going to do. And that is one of the things in high performance, you know, he was making those sacrifices before he knew if it was going to work or not. And there will be people who do those and it doesn't work, of course, especially not to the extent that it's worked for him. But it is also true that is a big part of how we can start to get better, is we all just do all these things that we know to work from other areas. You know, we all go in with, even by myself, I'm going to have goals with what I'm doing. I'm going to have a way to set up my practice so that it's going to achieve those goals, and I'm going to reflect. And it's effort, and it's not as fun as just playing the game. But once everyone starts to do it, you're going to be left behind if you're not. So you might as well be like the first part of the wave, I guess, is a way to think about it.
I think people maybe have, I don't think people have realistic expectations of what being a professional player is. And I think that's probably part of the problem, is they don't realize what it's actually going to take. You know, we all have this dream of playing video games all day, or being a streamer, or whatever it is you think that you want to do. What you actually want to do is to not have to work and sit at home and play video games, right? You're in the wrong thing if that's what you want to do, right? Go get smart, be a banker, work for 10 years, and then retire. That is a much more effective route to playing video games all day. I tell you that with absolute certainty. Because what you're describing actually is, at the end, I just want to be lazy, right? So that's entirely the wrong approach. What you actually want to do is you want to work yourself so hard that you can't work anymore, because that's how hard the best people are working, right? And I think that's really the difference. The best player I ever worked with, a guy called Kiko, he's the duelist for Team Liquid in VCT. And when I interviewed him, one of the things he said he did when he was like trying to become really mechanically proficient, you know, he was an exceptional player, probably from the get-go, someone with a huge amount of talent already, I guess. He reviewed every single time he died. Every single time he died, he reviewed it, which in League maybe doesn't sound like a big deal because you probably only die a handful of times, but in a Valorant game you die 20 times a game, right? So it's a lot. You're going to be watching a lot of deaths back and understanding exactly where you went wrong. And maybe that's a little overkill, but you start to realize what it takes. I'm still yet to understand this because I think intrinsically I'm clearly different to the people that think that way. Is it laziness, or is it people just don't realize what it actually takes? Do they really know what high performance is? I'm not sure.
I think it's also, again, comes back to that inherited wisdom and that kind of thing. I had the chance when I was working in the LEC to talk to a guy called Mark Elaine, who was, I know nothing about cricket, but he was one of the people who was there at the kind of turn of international cricket. And he was talking about when he first started, you went and got a beer and a burger in the break, and sometimes a couple of beers, and that was what everyone did. That's what the best people did, and that's what the worst people did. And so that's what people thought was the thing to do. And then, some people start to realize that maybe actually being a bit tipsy or even drunk is probably not optimal for my performance.
Yeah.
And when it changes, it changed, fairly quickly in the grand scheme of things. And if you couldn't keep up, you were massively left behind. But it could be that it depends what esport you're in as well, as to how developed it might be and how competitive it is going to be. But we keep saying, we're talking about the top percentages. But if no one's doing all these things, then the top percentages also don't need to do these things. But the thing is that as soon as some people do, I think it all just quickly shifts. And so it could be that there are people who, when you don't have the motivation of seeing these are the people around me and I've got to do this to even succeed, then it's quite different. And I think what you said before, really examining exactly what you want is an important thing. Now, I will be very careful about the names that I use, because this is obviously probably not something to be talking about. But someone told me at one point that their players in a certain esport, it wasn't the same in other esports, they don't actually want to win. They want to win and be seen as doing as little as possible. And that, to me, I think sums up exactly what you're talking about, that we've got people who can pretty much openly admit that from my point of view, I would prefer the opposite. If I succeed, I want everyone to see the work that's gone into it. But there's just this pervasive attitude in this certain area that it will change at some point, but maybe that's what it's got. So not necessarily laziness, but that drive to be constantly pushing yourself has to be just a complete outlier, to do things even when you're succeeding, not doing them. Okay, I'm still going to do these extra things, even if I already got to the level without them. So I think that'll be a part of it. And I think people will do them. And you look back in 10 years and everything will be a lot more developed. And what the standard that you need to be that top 0.1% is going to be twice as high as it is now. And that will be, hopefully, great for everybody and great for the whole ecosystem.
I think part of the challenge as well, and I think this is speaks to my motivations and probably some of yours as well, doing podcasts and writing the book. There just isn't enough of that trickle down of knowledge, right? I mean, how often do people get to hear from a top coach in League of Legends? Probably fairly infrequently. Like really get to hear someone pick their brains about what do they think, how do they think, what's their approach to practice, all of those things, or any player. It's very rare that we get those opportunities to hear that. And I think part of my motivations is to bring more of that knowledge to people, because it's necessary. And I guess to say this as well, like my goal is not to be a full-time professional coach. It's not my goal. It's not in my plan. I'm happy being a scientist. It's a great job. It probably pays much better than being a coach. So this is for me, for fun. But that doesn't mean I don't want to see esports change. He see the culture of the whole ecosystem change, and I think that's, you talk about the kind of biggest problems that we all have is what is the culture of gaming, right? Because it sucks, and it's often people, even when they're starting to take it seriously, they aren't really taking it that seriously, and for many people, it can be. In fact, myself included, when I was a player, it could be almost effortless to be exceptionally good. You know, when I was playing Battlegrounds, PUBG, when that came out, and that was a game that I really wanted to play. I'd already been, top 500 in Overwatch, and I thought, yeah, I'll have a go at Battlegrounds. Didn't study the game, I just went and played it, and I was like top 100, on the leaderboards, and I was like, oh, that's easy. Don't have to do anything, just play all day. Something has to change. I mean, I think as it becomes more popular and we get more people that are willing and understand what it takes, they will do that. But I think we also, and I think everyone that wants to see esports grow has a duty to make it clear. I mean, just go out and watch documentaries on people that climbed Mount Everest. Some of the best Olympians in any sport, the best sportsmen in any field. You go and look at what they do, and you tell me that we're anywhere near in esports. We're a long way off.
Yeah, and I think it ties back to a lot of the same things, where being the absolute top at a lot of things in life requires a huge amount of sacrifice. But quite often with esports, especially people who've been around a while, you could get to the top without that sacrifice. And so people almost kind of fell into it. One of the things that I also do video work alongside coaching in my career, I guess you'd say. And one of the things that I was really fascinated with is why are people a pro player? And no one really had a good answer. I mean, that was still an interesting thing to discover, because they never decided to do that. And actually, to be honest, that's the same with me. When I first started coaching in League of Legends, I did coaching in sport before in 2013. And it wasn't a thing that you could choose to be involved in esports, because it wasn't a thing anywhere in the West at all. And so the idea that you could go for it would be just completely crazy. And so I kind of fell into it. I fell into it without having to make the sacrifice, because that's the crazy thing about sport, is if you want to be the best footballer in the world, or you want to be a professional footballer, let's say, you have to make the sacrifice. Yeah, you have to make the sacrifice before you know if it's going to pay off or not. And maybe or the Olympics comes around once every 4 years. So maybe you have to sacrifice a decade of your life, and then you have this one day where maybe it'll pay off. And that, I think, creates or filters, I would say, rather than creates, for the kind of people who are going to do anything that it takes. And I think, at least currently, the way that esports is set up doesn't quite filter for that in the same way. And so there's a lot of people who get either to the very top, or at least to the professional level, without having to consciously go through that sacrificial phase. Although, for anyone watching, it's so much better than it used to be. It was absolutely crazy a decade ago. So I think we will get there, and we'll probably get there a lot faster than sport did. It won't take us hundreds of years, but we maybe aren't there yet.
No, I think another decade or two, maybe.
Okay. So
I reckon that's my expectation.
Okay. So moving on from that, but staying on the same question, let's say you had all the people, you had a consistent way to create buy-in, because they're always going to look for any extra edge, all this kind of thing. Now, what would be your biggest problem? So stopping you from playing the perfect game of Valorant?
I think you've already won. if everyone's on, I truly believe. I think if you're all doing the work, and you've got the right people, you've chosen the right people with the right amount of skill or ability to obtain that skill, I think as things stand, you would be the best team in the world. And I think we've seen that in teams that have come and gone. I think Fnatic's on a downturn in Valorant right now, but they were a team that I think had done that, and they were at the top for years, since the beginning of the game, pretty much, right? They've been at the top, and they've won the last 2 years. They've been basically unstoppable, and I think they're a great example of that is possible. I guess the challenge then, a little bit, I think, is what we were talking about before, is, well, then do you stop innovating, right? Have you won too much? There, of course, is a danger in that. And I think every team goes through that cycle where they have that wake-up call. It's like, well, okay, guys, we need to do something different. We need to go back, challenge our assumptions. Can we come up with a new innovative way of playing so that we can be the best? Because people have studied us so good and optimized the shit out of what we've kind of brought into the game and how we should play it. And yeah, we haven't kept up.
And you need that thing, just like the players that we're talking about, you need that thing to be constantly driving you and pushing you forward. And whenever we have seen this kind of thing happen in sport, for example, one of my, I don't know if you say favorite teams, because it's sort of like an era, is that there's a decade where the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team, were the number one ranked team in the world for a decade, which is, I mean, it's a small nation anyway, but that is just crazy. And when you hear stories, from inside, they originally all gathered around this belief of trying to become the best team. And then it's like, okay, we've done that. And then you say, okay, well, we want to be the best rugby team of all time. And now we're aiming towards that. And then after, 4 years or whatever at that point, technically, you're now the best, because no one's ever been the best for 4 years. And now it's like, okay, now what? And they just kept putting new things. And they were saying, we did research into hockey teams, because the longest streak at the top was a hockey team.
The best sports team ever to exist.
Exactly. And they even had, I think, technically their most dominant year was like year 8, which is just absolutely crazy. I don't know what pushes you to do something like that, but just really, really fascinating thing to look into. And they've actually started to be quite kind of open and honest with it. But it is, again, every time you do it, every time you go through and you question your assumptions and your presuppositions and all this, it is difficult. And so it's understandable if you're the best, just like the sacrifice thing we're talking about with players, if you're the best doing what you're doing, why would you want to be changing, and why would you want to be pushing forward? Because also there is a risk there where if you change the things that got you to the top, maybe you fall off a little.
Yeah, definitely. At the same time, I think if you, it's hard to say this, but I think if you haven't found ways to keep on growing at the rate that everyone else is, then you're not going to stay ahead, right? Esports is far less about where you are right now and much more about how quickly you can grow, because it's so young and because people are constantly innovating and because all of the games that we play are dynamic, right? In terms of essentially the rules of the game change frequently. So you have to be constantly innovating, no matter the game you're in.
Do you think that coaches would have more impact or less if the games changed less? Because it's something I've been, thinking about for a while. There's a tendency in League of Legends tournaments is when you get into playoffs, you stay on the same patch. And I was actually talking with someone who this is going to be a really big problem for them, because for some reason the playoffs in their region last way longer than in all the other regions. I mean, still Europe, so it's the regional leagues, which means that you want to be practicing against the Spanish teams or the French teams, but they've all moved on to the next patch.
But
I thought, okay, look, if you had 2 months or 3 months, rather than every 2 weeks is when League of Legends changes, which is completely crazy when you think about it. Yeah.
What the fuck?
Do you think coaches would have more impact or less if the game was more stable?
Oh, definitely more. So I guess Overwatch had this, right? This is what killed Overwatch 1, was there was this meta called the GOATS meta. It was called GOATS. It was nuts, right? I mean, every single team, right? Overwatch in a game, like any of the games we play, there's many different characters you can choose from. Every single team was playing the same combination of 6 characters for like 6 months, maybe, or a year. And you got to the point where, like, fractions of a second matter. Like in Overwatch, where like you're constantly fighting, right? And there's like it's all like kind of little microcycles and everything. The tiniest amount of optimization matters. Like really, 1% were the tier 3 teams got so good that it was 1%, right? And at that point, I think the coaches have significant impact. Yes, even more because you're hyper optimizing, right? And I think that's often really hard to do as a player, because it's a whole system, right? You have to be analyzing the whole system, not just the individual parts of it, and the whole system, and getting all of the tiny little 1% out of it. And that was a really interesting time because they kind of balanced out the game, and then it was like, oh well, Overwatch is kind of dead now. The esports scene kind of died. Well, hasn't died. I guess it's kind of having a bit of a resurgence at the moment, is my understanding, but I don't really follow the game anymore. But anyway, at the time, of course, hyper optimization. I think CS is a great example of this, right? You think coaches have no impact in CS? I would very much challenge that statement, right? It's a game that's very, very stable. Very little has changed in a decade, maybe, probably, right? And I think the coaches have huge impact, but maybe not always so much about the game, right? I think this is where performance, of course, becomes more important because the game is a little more static, but that doesn't mean that you can't innovate. You still have to be able to innovate. I mean, this happened a lot in CS where people just came up with new ways of doing things that no one had ever thought of, even after a decade, right? And then it was like, oh my God, they're just dominating everyone because they found this kind of niche way of doing something, and it's impossible to beat unless you like completely change how you're approaching the game. And that's I guess a great example where the coach wins the game on their own, which is very rare, right? I think I'm sure, again, many coaches I'm sure could relate to this. Like, you're just like, oh, well, we lost because my players didn't do what we kind of talked about, right? They were nervous, or, you know, someone had something going on in their life, and I mean, they didn't play very well. And so, you know, we didn't win. Nothing I could do about it. And I think in those really hyper optimized spaces, I think coaches actually probably have more impact rather than less, because the individual variance is so much smaller. So the impact of perfect strategy is more.
I think as well, we end up spending so much of our time in practice or our thought time as a coach just focused on what is currently good. If things are changing every 2 weeks, then you spend, I don't know, half your time just working out the new state of the game. It's like if every 2 weeks you change the weight of the basketball or the height of the net, you would spend most of your time working out how that affects us, and not time focusing on what we actually need to get better as a team, focusing on things like communication and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I do think that's one of the biggest problems that we have. So, you know, coming back to the original question, for me in League of Legends, I would say the biggest problems that we have is that the game changes unbelievably frequently. There's no way to break down the game, the drills thing. Although, like I said before, don't think you should use that as an excuse, because there's no way for anybody. So if you can still optimize practice in certain ways. And then the last one that we have is that there's just like as if infinite variables. Not actually infinite, of course, but the point is, whenever I show the team something that happened in a game, this will never happen again.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about it? Similar things will happen. But for example, if you take sport, we can practice line outs and say, well, we will get a line out in this game, and we will get a line out in this area, you know, definitely within this, maybe not every game, but within this season. And if you want to be even more granular, in this area in the first half. You know, you can practice those specific things, whereas we always have to deal with the fact that that thing that we're watching, a fight around a certain objective, is never going to happen again. And that's why, you know, one of the things that I wanted to, you know, what we are talking about, because you've got experience of kind of multiple different esports, how do you see the differences between those games? So we're talking about Overwatch. Does it patch a little bit slowly? Like Valorant, is that how? Because I do like all the agents and the abilities and stuff, but I do sometimes feel like we're losing maybe some of or not losing things, but we're putting in some of the same problems. Where like, how frequently does Valorant change from a professional point of view?
I feel it's fairly stable, actually. I think they don't patch. I don't know how often do we get patches, every 3 months or something. It's on that kind of time scale, or maybe slightly longer. Don't quote me on that because I'm not sure I know the exact numbers. But like as a coach, it doesn't feel like it's that often, and often the changes are minor enough, unless like the big patch rolls around, like maybe every 6 months, where like a map's been changed. But even then, I think it really depends on what your approach is, right? How granular do you get? Because again, I think good systems are what make great teams, right? Not how does this particular fight around the dragon pit work in this specific situation against these 5 characters. We're playing these 5 characters and they did this particular mistake, right? And like, how do we punish that specific thing? It's no, well, what are the systems that you operate on? Again, like operational models, right? It's all about contingency, right? This is where I think like studying how do, for example, like does a group of like people in the military go about clearing a town, right? An unknown town that they got a map of it, but they have no idea how many, bad guys are there, right? How do they do that safely? What contingencies do they have in place? How do they communicate to each other? How do they do it in the best way possible? That's really all you can do, right? Is have structures and lots of contingency in place that enable you to operate the best that you can, because you will always have unplanned scenarios every single time, right? And it's about what's the system that underpins how you play. Yeah, and I've been coaching, I guess, long enough that I very rarely talk. I always do my best to come to the source of the problem, not what is this specific problem. Like, why did we end up in this situation? Half of the time, and I mean this, probably 50% of the time, we just didn't have a plan, and so it was fucked, right? Whatever we did, someone did something, and it's like, well, you're fucked now. You're already fucked because you didn't plan, right? And that's probably a good half of the time. Becomes very tiresome to say to a team, right? It's like, but you lost this round because you didn't talk to each other. Like, legitimately, you just didn't talk to each other. Someone did a thing because it felt like the right thing to do in that moment. You're all fucked because you didn't talk about it. And then, okay, well, why did that happen? Why did they not talk about it? Why do we not have good enough systems in place that mean that doesn't happen, right? Because, and again, this is where I think studying people in the military, just again as an example, but probably some of the best minds are there simply because the stakes are so fucking high. Someone does something stupid and people die, right? We don't operate with those kind of stakes, but we should be trying to implement operational models that account for those kind of things, because you will just beat everyone, right? Because you have so much contingency, you operating so efficiently that you just, you could it's all a percentage game, right? There's always randomness. Someone could just hit a crazy shot. Someone could just hit a skill shot in League of Legends and you just lose the fight, right? You can't, those things happen. You can't plan for them. They are going, you can only plan so much contingency in, but it's all a percentage game, right? If you win 70% of the time, you're probably the best team in the world, right? That doesn't mean that you're not going to go out in the first round of a bracket, because 30% of the time you're going to lose anyway. It's not possible to be perfect. That was a long rant about this.
No, it's good. It's really good. I was going to say, how do you touched on it a little bit, but how do you work out what needs to be systematized and what is just not a freak accident, but like, how do you work out that part? So maybe when there's no plan, then it becomes a bit obvious, but the other half of the time, how do you work out which is which?
So I guess, yeah, this is something that I probably need to write in my book, because I guess there's an algorithm, I guess, in a sense, in my mind that kind of go through, well, first of all, is there a plan, or did we even talk to each other? And then, was that plan good? Okay, did we execute that plan as well as we could? And if we did, okay, did someone just hit a crazy shot? Like, if we had a good plan, it was a really good plan, we executed it perfectly, and someone was just like somewhere, they just hit a crazy shot, well, then it's like, okay, unlucky. Can we then do something differently next time that means that we don't do that? Or okay, yeah, this question is often impossible to answer. Is it just freak luck, right? Because like I said, if you're winning it 70-80% of the time, of course 20% of the time some guy 180s and hits 2 headshots, right? Or again, the same thing in League. I'm sure he hits some crazy chain of his skills and just kills both of you, and you're like, oh well, shit, right? But your plan could have still been perfect. Well, then I guess you could question, well, was it the plan might have been perfect? Was it the right necessary decision making in that moment? Should we have not taken that fight? Well, you get into the weeds on the strategy, right? I don't know how well optimized it is in League, but oftentimes it's still the human error that causes the mistakes, in my experience. In all of the FPS games I've worked in, well, the vast majority of the time, and this is again probably true. I again making a bit of an assumption, but probably true in most games, is having a good plan and doing it together, or sorry, having a bad plan and a shit plan that's nonsense and doing it together. You're probably going to win anyway, most of the time. That's what matters. Actually, good plans done alone doesn't matter, right? Your planning could be really shit. Fundamentally, you just have to do stuff together and operate as a team. It's actually one of someone I interviewed. He was head coach of a team called Apex. He works for Leviathan now in VCT. And one of the things that we talked about was, like, what are the most important things? And he said that one of the mottos they had in their team was apes together strong, right? Is don't think about it, just do it together, right? You don't need to overthink it. Especially in games where there are so many variables and it's so complex. You can only have so much contingency in there, right? But if you just run together with confidence, you execute your strategy faster than they can understand what's happening. It doesn't matter if it was like a stupid place to take a fight or maybe not the best idea in the world. If you planned it well and executed it together effectively, you're probably going to win anyway. Same in League as in Valorant. You kill one person, you've got a huge advantage, right? Massive advantage. So just killing the first person, often you've won the fight anyway, even if it was slightly questionable how you went about it.
So I guess that sort of answers the next question, but I'd still like to get your opinion on it. How do you tell? So let's say we have a plan. We did the plan. It didn't work. Maybe it's not something quite as obvious as someone just wins a 1v2 or a 1v3, but it didn't work. How do you know if the plan was good or not? Because quite often, again, because of the variables, you might have the rough plan again, but you're never going to have that situation again. So how do you work out if the fact that it didn't work, is that not proof that it wasn't a good plan? Like, because sometimes it is proof, sometimes it isn't proof. How do you actually go about that in a practical sense?
One is not a valid sample size, is what I would say. You have to do it. If you've done it 50 times and it's only worked 10 of them, it's probably a shit plan, right? If it's worked 40 of them, it's probably a really fucking good plan. So I think that's probably a really important part of answering that question is, well, have you done it enough times to actually know? And the second one is, I think, again, as coaches, it's really easy to get stuck in the weeds, right? Like your team lost a round because two guys didn't talk to each other, right? And then you're like, oh, well, this plan, And when you spend 20 minutes talking about this one decision that was like, oh, could have been bad, could have been good, and you just wasted 20 fucking minutes. I'm sorry. It's like, it wasn't worth it. You've probably got easier problems to fix where you can gain much bigger percentages than talking about those problems. Again, that's a little bit of a non-answer, but I still believe that we often, very, very infrequently, I haven't yet been on a team where it's mattered that much that like every single situation I've had time to talk about specific rounds where single rounds matter.
And I think even what you're talking about there, I think is really good, where the fact that you've got a system and a specific way that you approach things is going to give you that larger sample size. Let's just agree that this is the way that we're going to approach this certain situation, and then we'll find out over time if it works or not. And if you don't have that first step, it's almost like the system itself can then prove whether the system works or not. Whereas if you don't have anything, then if every time you approach it differently, then you're going to be left with a sample size of one for every different play. And how do you know what's better?
You remind me, actually. So we had exactly what we were describing here, where we had a particular execute that we wanted to practice. So on the A site of a particular map, we went and we just like, okay, on attack, we're just going to do this execute every other round, right? We're just going to go back there every other round. And we did it for a whole scrim and it didn't work. And there was basically one thing that countered it. And this other team did it in every single round. They were very aware and they basically knew exactly what countered it. They have they're a top tier VCT team. So yeah, it's not surprising. But it didn't work every single time. So that's the time where you say, okay, well, the strategy is not good. This is what counters it. And even when we were dry, of course, in Valorant, we can just dry run that strategy. When we were dry running that strategy, me and the coaches hop in the lobby and I was like, what if I just do this to counter it? I did this in our dry runs and we didn't have an answer to the dry runs. It was more about whether people are going to think about doing that to counter it. Turns out a good team will do it every single time and you'll just get annihilated and the strategy won't work. But then you've proved that it doesn't work, right? And you don't have a good solution to that problem necessarily.
And that comes exactly back to what we were talking about before. We were talking about how to practice. You optimize practice to learn the thing you're trying to learn. So you say, I don't care if we win or not. We're going to do this exact same thing on the A site, every single time. It doesn't work the first time. Next time, we're going to do the same thing because what we're trying to learn is this approach good? We're not trying to learn, how to beat the team that we're currently playing against. So it's almost like, yes, there's going to be lots of variables. And depending on the game, there's going to be more or less variables, but there's going to be loads, no matter what game we're playing. But once we have the systems, then we can start optimizing the practice around those systems to find out if they're good or not. So just like we were talking about having a vision, a big important first step of that is to just work out what are the kind of players that I think I work well with. Then I'm going to go and get those players. And maybe it doesn't work at all. But if I never had a goal, then I would just get 5 different players and don't know if it works because of that or because of something else. Whereas if I say, I want really creative players, I get 5 really creative players or, however many you need for your specific game. And then that's when you realize, no, actually, I'm very systematic. I don't like the huge amounts of creativity. So I think it can be almost like a self-fulfilling way of doing things. So I think it's... Maybe it's not how you would do it if you could control every part of the game, but I think it is the best we've got, where the systems will either prove or disprove themselves the more you repeat them.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things that I wanted to touch on before we get to the quickfire questions at the end is the podcast that you're doing. And you mentioned before, obviously I'm doing one as well. That's what we're doing right now. But what was the inspiration behind that? What was the thing that made you want to do it?
Watch a lot of podcasts. I like podcasts. And so I was like, well, why not do one, right? I think that's a better question. I think if you're a high performance person, generally the question is, well, why not? I have the time. I have the money. I could pay for an editor to do it. Why not? It takes me... The hardest thing is to persuade people to actually come on, right? As I'm sure you found, is persuading people either that they would actually want to do a podcast, which most people in esports have absolutely no interest in doing whatsoever. They just want to play video games, or them finding the time for it, both of which are hard. But there was nothing to stop me doing it, right? That was why. And I care about bringing impact to the wider esports scene. I mean, that's really my goal, is to bring knowledge that people wouldn't otherwise have access to. When I started coaching, there were some resources out there, right? They do exist. But also trying to do it in a way that gets people to click on it, right? I want to make good content too. I want to get content that creates an impact, right? I mean, strive for more views, because that's how you have a bigger impact, and that's how we can start to change the culture in esports, right? We can start to perpetuate the idea that high performance is important, that culture in your team matters, that coaches need to have a clear idea and clear vision and good systems and, and a good understanding of what they actually want. All of these things start with the people that start talking about the ideas, right? And I guess for me, that's really why, is to really start trying to make an impact, right? Trying to make a difference in the scene.
And how do you approach once you have a guest? How do you what's your system of approaching an interview? How do you go about it?
So usually it's quite obvious when I select the people. I usually, again, like with any good content, the packaging is half of the goal, right? Half of the deal is how are you going to package this? How are you going to sell this person to get people to click on them? And I think often I go in with that idea before I've even asked, or when I ask the person, when I go to reach out to them, have a clear idea of how can I package them? How can I sell them to people on YouTube so they actually come and watch the video? And then what kind of things are people interested in knowing, you know? I guess that's generally my approach, but like this, I guess it's often just kind of a conversation, you know. If someone says something interesting, then we'll go down that route. I try not to be too rigid in the way that I approach it. I think, again, like you, having experience as a coach and knowing the scene well positions you to ask the right kind of questions, which obviously makes it a lot easier than just than maybe some of the casters in the scene. I think that's maybe the thing that I guess I kind of wanted to differentiate as well. As there's a lot of casters, there's a lot of interviewers out there that can go out and they can ask questions about the game, but they don't ask the questions that I would ask, right? They don't get to the answer that I would want if I was there really trying to learn from this person. And I think that's really how I want to differentiate, is to ask those questions and ask the difficult questions, right? Because it's not all easy, you know. The scene isn't perfect. I've got an episode coming out next week where I talk to a player from top tier player in Game Changers, right, which is the kind of female marginalized gender scene in Valorant, and ask, well, why are Game Changers players not as good as the male players, right? Like, just ask that question, because it's a challenging question, but we all want the scene to grow, or maybe we don't all want the scene. I want the scene to grow, and I want to help those people. And, you know, we all want to see esports flourish. And to do that, you have to ask the difficult questions. And specifically about the game, the technical ones, right? That I think a lot of people aren't asking.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, so much of it resonates with exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, in League of Legends, we have plenty of people who are fantastic interviewers who are often focused a lot on what happened, you know, this team, then this team, then this team. And one of the things that I've wanted to do is talk just about the ideas instead and what's behind it. And there's a few people that I've had on or will have on that they have this kind of big moment in their career where something really bad or really good has happened. And either way, especially when it's really bad and really dramatic, but I'm just not going to talk about it. And I think that's actually allowed more people to be comfortable coming on, because I'm not going to talk about the drama stuff, because there are other people who do that better than me. That was always my thinking.
And
Okay, so I'd like to end with the quickfire questions. And as I've said before, but it just resonates exactly with what you were just saying. Like, I think one of the things as well with having these kind of discussions is showing that we all come from completely different areas and different backgrounds, and the stuff that we can lean into to set ourselves apart, I think, is just as important as all the things that we do that are the same. So the first one, who are the coaches that you look up to, either now or early on in your career, or the people, I should say, not the coaches?
Okay. Coaches, a easy answer. DDK is someone that I spent a huge amount of time consuming his content when I first got into coaching. His content is still great. He has a great podcast. In a lot of ways, I'm kind of emulating things that he's done. He's someone that I have looked up to since I basically started playing on the PC. So I think he's probably a pretty clear one to me in the esports space.
What's the biggest hardship that you've experienced as a coach?
I think not being able to pursue this full time. I think, honestly, it that is very much against my nature. You know, I want to push and I want to do the best and I want to spend all my time doing the things that I do to be the best at them. And I think I've been fortunate enough to be offered opportunities to do this full time, but have never been positioned to take them. So in some ways, I'm making up for that by trying to kind of have a broader impact, and I think bring the experience and knowledge that I do have that maybe hasn't shown in the kind of in game, I guess, essentially, right? In terms of the results that the teams that I've been on have had, and the kind of level that I guess I've played at or coached at.
And what's your top highlight as a coach?
Oh, definitely when I coached, there's a UK team called the Goose House. I think working with them was awesome. They're kind of a UK Valorant community. Working with them has always been really, really awesome. And I think specifically coaching Kiko, who is now on Team Liquid, I think when we had the team with him on it, I think that was the best team I've ever been on, for sure, no doubt. Several of those players and of course my assistant coach have all gone on to play in either the regional leagues or in the global league as well. So yeah, that's definitely a highlight for me.
What are 3 non-negotiable behaviors that you and the people around you need to buy into?
I think the first one is work hard. I mean, work as hard as you can. I understand that in many of the situations we're in where we're maybe not full time, you can only give so much. But I think giving your absolute best, I think, is probably the first one. I think that the second one that I definitely need to push harder on, I think, but I think for me is really in my core values is just be nice to each other. You know, it's so simple and so important. And I think much bigger than just the team that we're in is just be kind to people. And I think the third one, which I guess kind of isn't quite the same as working hard, right? Working hard, I mean giving the most effort. The kind of tangential to this, but related, I think doing the things that you don't want to do is so important, because that's where the growth is, right? If you are uncomfortable or you aren't able to do it to the best or to the kind of standard that you would like to, then I think that's the thing that you should be doing more of, because that's where the growth is to be had.
Okay, and then the last question. If you from today could give yourself one piece of advice when you first started your coaching journey, what would it be and why?
Ask for help. Go out and find a mentor. I mean, I think this comes up so often, maybe kind of like in this guru culture, find someone to mentor you, but like, it is so not bullshit. It is so important. It's something I have done too little and now probably too late when it comes to esports, but I think will put me in good stead in my career more generally. Go out there, find someone that's got more experience with you, and find a way to either persuade them to give you some time or give them something that makes it worth their time. It's game changing, honestly. I think many people probably haven't experienced really good mentorship and coaching, I think. And I think in some ways coaching has a bad rep, particularly from a lot of the kind of websites out there where you can get coaching from a whatever top ranked player, you know. That stuff's all a fucking scam. I'm sorry, it's bullshit, right? Just because someone's good at ranked doesn't mean they have any idea what they're talking about, and they certainly don't give a shit about you. That's the difference with mentorship, right? Is they give a shit about you. They are invested in you as a person beyond just the technical skills. And I think it will change how you do things, and it will, for the better, by a big margin, you know, increase your prospects.
Well, I'm of course incredibly biased, but I completely agree. I think that's actually why I started doing that, is because I spent a huge amount of time in the game at the top level, and then I just worked with someone else, and in like 6 months working with someone else. I learned more than I did in the decade before. And
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
it is completely game changing. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and thank you for doing what you're doing and talking about things and being so open on your YouTube channel and in everywhere. So yeah, we'll definitely have to do another one of these in the future.
Yeah, definitely, John. Thank you so much for having me.